In late November 2004, my daughters moved to our home after a difficult foster care situation and lived in a van with their drug-addicted biological mom. They were amazed by the simple things they had, such as eating, playing with toys, and having nice clothes. When the Christmas tree went up, they were clueless about Santa and the tradition of giving presents. We took them to the mall to visit Santa, but they were skeptical about the whole deal. They had never received a single present or tree, and when we picked them up, the foster mom gave them only a bag of men's tube socks. On Christmas Eve, we put out milk and cookies for Santa. The girls were skeptical about the whole deal and tried to find holes in my story. We were listening to Christmas music and reading stories, and they kept running to the front window to look for Santa. I told them Santa wouldn't come until later after they were asleep, but they said they were looking for the police officers who always come to get them at Christmas. The next morning, I put on my work boots, left dirty boot prints on the white carpet, took a bite, drank milk, and put out the Santa presents. The next morning, the girls dragged me downstairs to show me the footprints and half-eaten cookie, and they were caught up in the magic. They didn't care about the presents at all, but they were caught up in the magic.
During my senior year of high school, I tutored students for extra cash. One day, a guidance counselor asked me to help a freshman, Tommy, in English and business. His mom had called the school saying he needed extra help, and she mentioned Tommy was very shy and struggled with self-esteem. I agreed to help. Our sessions began with me reassuring him, as he was bright but lacked confidence. He wouldn't make eye contact and often doubted himself. I noticed he walked home alone every day, so I asked if he knew my sister, who was in his grade. Tommy admitted he didn't talk to anyone and had no friends. It broke my heart. I decided to try something different. One day, I told Tommy we were going to sit with my friends at the library, rather than at our usual table. He was nervous but agreed. I introduced him to my friends, who welcomed him warmly. Dallas and Johnny asked about him, Sarah complimented his hair, and Tommy's face lit up. He started sitting with us every session, and over time, he became more confident, joking with us and even teasing me about my boyfriend. His grades improved, and he stood taller, no longer slouching. By the end of the semester, Tommy's mom sent me a heartfelt message, thanking me for changing her son's life. A few years later, my sister told me Tommy had become a class clown with lots of friends. I was moved to tears. It was a small act, but it had a lasting impact on him, and I'll never forget how one small gesture changed someone's life.
A few years ago, I worked at a small coffee shop in my college town. One day, a regular customer named Matt came in with a huge stack of textbooks. He was always super quiet and kept to himself, so I decided to strike up a conversation. I asked what he was studying, and he said he was working on his last semester of engineering. He looked exhausted, and I could see the stress on his face. I knew he was struggling, so I casually mentioned that I was always around if he ever needed a break or wanted to talk. He smiled, thanked me, and left. A week later, he came in again, but this time, he looked even more worn out. I asked if he was okay, and he confessed he was having trouble with a project and was really starting to doubt himself. He said he felt like everyone else in his class was way smarter than him. I told him that college is hard for everyone, and sometimes, all it takes is a little extra support to push through. He seemed a bit more at ease, but still unsure. The next day, I decided to leave a note on his usual table. It read, "You're smarter than you think. Don't let one tough project define your worth. You've got this." I left it under his textbooks, hoping it would make him smile. A week later, Matt came in, and this time, he seemed different, more confident. He thanked me for the note and said it really helped him push through. He said he finished his project and passed with flying colors. A few months later, Matt graduated and came in to show me his diploma. He told me he couldn't have done it without that small bit of encouragement. It may have been just a little note, but to Matt, it meant the world. I'll never forget that moment of kindness, and it reminded me how small acts of encouragement can make a huge difference. I'm 22, just graduated from college a few months ago. While my classmates were polishing resumes and stressing over interviews, my parents sat me down and made it clear, I wouldn't be job hunting. I'd be working for them. They run a massive waste management company, citywide contracts, trucks, recycling centers, everything. It's their legacy, and they want me to take over one day. But they also said I wouldn't be stepping into a cushy office role with a nice title. If I wanted to lead, I had to understand the business from the ground up. Fair enough. I respected that. So I started at the very bottom. One day I was on a truck hauling bins in the rain, the next I was elbow deep in recyclables at the sorting center. I never told anyone who I was. I wore the same uniform, followed the same schedule, and took the same breaks. I wanted real experience. No shortcuts. At first, it was fine, humbling, even. I gained a new level of respect for the people who do this every day. They're tough. But over time, the vibe shifted. I got more grunt work while others kicked back. Straightening bins. Cleaning up after everyone. New guy stuff, over and over. I didn't complain. I kept my head down. I figured it was part of earning my place. Then came the day that broke me. It was raining hard, and we were short-staffed. I was soaked, running on fumes. Still, I pushed through until Ron, one of the senior guys, dumped his last tasks on me and said, "You're the new guy. Handle it." I gotta leave early. I snapped. Calmly but firmly, I said no. He stared like I'd grown a second head. Then smirked. "Careful. Management might not like it if I talk about your attitude." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Then let's go to management right now." He blinked. Walked off. That was the first time I stood up for myself. I didn't use the boss's kid card, and still haven't. But I've learned that proving I'm humble doesn't mean being everyone's doormat.
I, 27F, just found out my husband, 30M, has been pretending to be a cat online for 3 years, and I don't know what to do. Okay, so I'm literally shaking while typing this. My husband and I have been married for 5 years, together for 7. He's always been kind of quirky. Like he talks to our cat in full sentences, but I thought it was just cute or whatever. Last night, I was using his laptop because mine died, and I noticed his Reddit was still logged in. I know, I shouldn't have snooped, but something in me told me to look. Y'all, this man, this grown man, has been running a whole-ass cat roleplay account for 3 years. He writes in first person as a cat. Like, human forgot to feed me today. Vengeance will be swift. Time to knock glass from high place. But that's not even the worst part. He's popular. Like top posts, awards, thousands of followers. People genuinely think he's a cat. He has internet friends that think they're talking to some sassy British shorthair named Mr. Whiskers. He gets into fights with other cat accounts about territory and kibble brands. I went into the rabbit hole, and this man has a full-fledged cat nemesis named Sir Pounce-a-Lot. They have beef. There's literal fanfiction of their rivalry in the comments. When I confronted him, he just sighed and went, "You weren't supposed to find out like this." Like, find out what, sir? That I married Warrior Cat's fanfic roleplay Tumblr in human form? I don't know what to do. He's the love of my life, but I can't look at him without imagining him typing out "mlem." The humans have displeased me once again. Do I divorce him? Do I make an account and become his rival? How do I move forward from this?
I'm 22, just graduated from college a few months ago. While my classmates were polishing resumes and stressing over interviews, my parents sat me down and made it clear, I wouldn't be job hunting. I'd be working for them. They run a massive waste management company like citywide contracts, fleet of trucks, recycling centers, the whole deal. It's their legacy, and they want me to take over someday. But they also made it clear I wouldn't be jumping into some cushy office role with a fancy title. If I was going to lead the company, I had to understand it from the ground up. Fair enough. I actually respected that. So I started at the very bottom. One day I was on a truck hauling trash bins in the rain, the next I was elbow deep in recyclables at the sorting center. I never told anyone who I was. I wore the same uniform, followed the same schedule, and showed up like every other new guy. I wanted real experience. No special treatment, no shortcuts. At first, it was fine. Humbling, even. I started to respect the people who do this every day in ways I couldn't before. They're tough. They work hard. But after a while, the vibe started to shift. I was doing more and more of the grunt work while others kicked back. I was told to straighten out the bins, clean up after others, do the new guy stuff constantly. I didn't complain. I kept my head down. I figured it was part of paying dues. But then came the day that broke me. It was raining hard, and we were already short-staffed. I barely slept the night before, showed up exhausted, and got drenched within the first hour. My clothes were soaked. I was cold and running on fumes. Still, I pushed through most of the shift until one of the senior guys, Ron, decided he was done. He dumped the rest of his tasks on me and said, "You're the new guy, you handle it." I gotta leave early. I snapped. Politely, but firmly, I told him no, I wasn't doing his work. I was done letting people pile on just because they outranked me. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Then, with a smirk, he said, "Careful. Management might not like it if I start talking about your attitude." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Then let's go to management right now." He blinked. Didn't say another word. Just walked off. That was the first time I've ever stood up for myself like that at work. I didn't play the "I'm the owner's son" card. I still haven't. But I'm starting to realize, being the boss's kid doesn't mean I have to accept being walked over to prove I'm humble. I'm here to learn not to be everyone's personal doormat. When I was 8 years old, my best friend moved away. Her name was Maya, and she had curly hair that bounced when she laughed, a fearless streak, and an infectious imagination. We spent whole afternoons in our treehouse, embarking on adventures as knights, pirates, or space explorers. Then, one spring day, she packed up her family and drove off, not forever, just, very, very far away. I missed her painfully. School felt emptier without her. I found myself wandering the playground alone, clutching my brand new notebook where we'd written stories together. I kept waiting for her to show up in line for lunch or at the swings. But she didn't. A month later, my mom brought home a small bird cage. She called it a temporary foster, a bright yellow canary with a timid chirp. "Think of him as company," she said gently. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I could care. Maya's absence felt too big for a bird. I named him Pip. He was shy, often hiding in the corner of his cage. I remember sitting beside him at the kitchen table while I did homework, pretending we were investigators unraveling a mystery. I'd tell him about Maya and everything we used to do. Pip's head would cock, as if listening. Over weeks, I learned patience. The first time Pip hopped to the center perch, I cheered. When he sang a single sweet note, I jumped to show my mom. "He's singing." I cried. She smiled like I'd painted the sun in my room. During those days, Pip became my little spark. He reminded me friendship can start small, and sometimes from the smallest, quietest places. As Pip gained confidence, I found mine, too. I joined the school's creative writing club, mustering courage to read aloud one of our stories. My palms sweated while I clutched the notebook, but I remembered Pip's first timid chirp. I read. The room went quiet. A few applause followed. I beamed. That summer, I wrote Maya a letter. "I got a bird. He sings. I hope he makes you smile." I tucked it into an envelope and mailed it across the country. Days turned into weeks, and I wondered if I'd hear back. Meanwhile, Pip, once content in his cage, started fluttering along the bars, pecking at the open door, eager to explore. He felt ready. I set him free in my room, closing the cage door behind him. He hesitated, glanced back at the familiar bars, then hopped onto the edge, then flew. Pip's wings caught the sunlight, and he fluttered from curtain rod to bookshelf, finally perching on my desk. He looked at me and sang, not a single note, but a burst of melody. Something in my chest swelled. A few days later, a bright envelope arrived. Maya wrote that she loved the letter, and she'd even drawn a little bird doodle. She said she missed me, but she was glad I had Pip, and proud of me for writing. It was like finding a bridge across the miles. Middle school was weird. Everything felt bigger, stranger. I was older now, awkward, unsure. But Pip was there every morning, greeting me with a cheerful trill. When I had worries, tests, new classes, dramas, I'd sit in the kitchen and tell him everything. And he'd chirp back, like he understood. One day, while sitting with Pip, I looked down to see my younger sister, Leah, watching. She was 6, always full of questions and energy. She asked, "Can I hold him?" Pip paused, then hopped onto her finger. She squealed with delight. I realized there was enough room in my heart, for Pip and for Leah. That day, I showed her how to feed him, how to change his water, how to read his little moods. Leah beamed, and it felt so good to share. By spring, Pip's song had become a household ritual. Mom started calling them Pip's morning concerts. Leah and I would fight over who got to feed him first. We even made him a drawbridge from a shoebox, decorated with marker flowers. Pip didn't seem to mind, he hopped on, then fluttered to his perch, as if to enjoy the decor. At school, inspired by Pip, I joined the environmental club. We planted flowers, cleaned trails, and learned about bird habitats. I learned birds needed space to fly, clean air, trees, safe environment. Pip had taught me that freedom matters. One autumn morning, Pip quit singing. His perch was too quiet. His eyes looked tired. I nudged Leah awake and said, "Something's wrong." Mom listened. The vet visit followed. Pip needed medicine. We were told it might be serious. I spent that week beside his cage, praying. I whispered, "Come back, buddy." Leah drew happy pictures for him. Mom read him stories. All we could do was wait. On day 5, early in the morning, I woke to a trill. A single note, then another. I raced downstairs. Pip was singing. Soft but clear. I cried. Leah clapped. Mom hugged me. He fought through sickness. And won. That week changed us. Pip became not just a pet, but a symbol of resilience, love, family. We made a golden bookmark that read, "To small beginnings, brave hearts, and new wings." Years passed. Pip's story became family lore. I grew, moved schools, navigated teenage years. Yet every time I faced something scary, first day of high school, heartbreak, performances, I'd remember Pip's first timid chirp and the first day he flew in my room. And it'd remind me, you can learn to fly, one beat at a time. Now, I'm a senior, packing up dorm life, preparing for the future. Pip is somewhere with Merrick, a retired couple who volunteered at the environmental club. I visit him every break. He still sings, for me, for them, for all of us. Last night, I wrote in my journal, "Pip taught me how to hope, how to care, how to take risks." I scribbled, "May I carry his spirit with me." I closed it, heart full. Because sometimes the smallest friend, a shy bird in a temporary cage, can change the course of everything. He taught me friendship, healing, wings. And now I know, I can take flight, carry others, and sing. When I was 10, our town's public library announced it would close at the end of the year. I remember the day I found out. I was sprawled on the floor of the children's section, nose buried in a fantasy novel. The librarian, Mrs. Cleary, peeked around the shelves and told me softly, "They say the library might shut down if donations don't pick up." My chest tightened. The library was my sanctuary, where dragons roared in my mind, and spaceships launched into infinity. I couldn't imagine life without its tall wooden shelves and the creak of the revolving ladder. So I did what felt natural, I volunteered. At first, I was just shelving books and stamping return slips. But the library staff saw my passion and made me the official, junior story ambassador. My mission? To bring new kids to story time and revive interest in the library. I began visiting elementary classrooms, standing in front of squealing kindergartners, holding picture books high. I'll never forget the day I read Where the Wild Things Are, the hush that fell when Max's ship arrived, the gasps at each roar. I felt magic in that silence. Slowly, more kids came to Saturday story time. Parents mentioned seeing their children leave school with books under their arms. We posted flyers around town, "Come meet our junior story ambassador." I even hosted a "Create Your Own Bookmark" craft day, and the place buzzed with glitter and giggles. Then something beautiful happened. Other community members stepped up. The local bakery donated cookies for reading hours. A retired teacher started a "Poetry in the Park" event every Wednesday. The gardening club planted a book nook garden outside, with benches and blooming flowers named after classic authors. I realized the library was more than books, it was a heart that beat for connection. Mrs. Cleary smiled wider every day. One afternoon she said, "Thanks to you, we've seen a 40% increase in visitors." I nearly cried. But then, with only weeks left, I overheard the mayor on the news. The town still needed several $1,000s to save the library. My stomach dropped. I knew what I had to do. I organized a books and bake sale fundraiser. I rallied volunteers, my classmates, neighbors, parents. We baked, we priced, we decorated tables with ribbons and balloons. One of my classmates, Jen, even donated her old comic book collection. The day of the sale, rain threatened, but the turnout was incredible. Families, seniors, even the mayor showed up, holding bags and waving bookmarks. Music floated from an outdoor speaker. We raised enough money, and then some. The town council announced 2 days later that the library would stay open, for good. The vote was unanimous. On the evening of the grand celebration, they renamed the Children's Corner the Young Story Ambassadors Alcove, complete with a small plaque of my name. Standing on the risers, watching kids read, seeing diapers in carriages turn into toddlers poring over picture books, I understood the power of belonging. I looked at Mrs. Cleary, whose eyes glistened, and she mouthed, "Thank you." And I thought, I did it, not alone, but together. A town, a library, a little ambassador, and a shelf full of dreams. I was 24, newly certified, and fresh out of nursing school when I landed my first real job, night shift at a mid-sized hospital in my hometown. It wasn't glamorous, but I was proud. The uniform felt like armor. I was finally doing what I'd trained for. I was nervous, of course. The floor was quiet, mostly post-op patients, elderly folks, long recoveries. I got used to the beeping machines, the rustle of sheets, and that sterile smell that somehow never fades. On my third night, I noticed something odd. Outside room 204, there was a bench. Not a hospital bench, this one was wooden, old, carved with initials. Like someone dragged it from a backyard and set it down in that hallway. No one ever seemed to mention it. I asked one of the older nurses about it. She smiled and said, "That's Mr. Green's bench." Patient? No, she said. His wife. A few nights later, I saw him. Mid-70s, neatly dressed, with a thermos and a newspaper folded in his lap. He was sitting quietly on the bench outside 204, like it was a routine. I approached him. "Can I help you, sir?" He looked up and smiled gently. "No help needed, thank you." just waiting. I hesitated. Are you visiting someone? He nodded. My wife. She's in 204. Oh, I didn't realize we had visitors this late. He chuckled. They let me. Been doing this a while. The next night, he was there again. And the next. Same time, same bench, same quiet smile. Eventually, I sat with him. We talked, light things at first. Weather. Baseball. Hospital coffee, which he claimed was strong enough to power a plane. His name was Arthur Green, and his wife, Evelyn, had been in that room for nearly a year. A stroke had left her nonverbal. She rarely moved. But Arthur came every night, stayed till morning. Always on the bench. She was there for me, he once said. 43 years of marriage. This is the least I can do. Arthur started bringing me a second thermos of coffee. He told me stories about Evelyn, how they met at a record store, how she danced barefoot in the kitchen, how she laughed at his terrible jokes. I knew more about her favorite desserts than some of my patients' charts. One night, I asked why the bench was there. She always loved gardens, he said, gently touching the wood. I built this for her on our anniversary. She read books on it, took naps on it, held our daughter on it. When she got sick, I asked the hospital if I could bring it. So I'd feel close to her. I didn't know what to say. He said, sometimes, love means showing up. Even when nothing changes. Time passed. Winter came. The hospital felt colder, emotionally, too. Some nights were rough, emergency admissions, tense families, patients not making it. But Arthur never missed a night. When the snow was heavy, he came early. When Evelyn slept quietly, he sat and held her hand. One night, around 4 a.m., I passed room 204 and found Arthur dozing. He looked peaceful, but his hand still rested on Evelyn's. That night, I cried in the break room. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. I was witnessing real love. Not flowers and rings, but the quiet, enduring kind. In early spring, things started to change. Evelyn passed peacefully in her sleep. It was a quiet shift. I was there. Arthur sat by her side, holding her hand, whispering, "Thank you for waiting for me." The room felt impossibly still. I expected Arthur would stop coming. But the next night, he showed up, bench and all. He said, "I'm not ready to say goodbye." Not yet. He stayed every night for a week. Then once a week. Then once a month. Eventually, he stopped coming. But he left the bench. A plaque was placed on the bench. In memory of Evelyn Green. For the love that waited, and the man who never left. New nurses came and went. They'd ask about the bench, and we'd tell them. It became a quiet symbol of something we didn't see in charts or tests, a reminder of care, of love, of simply showing up. Now, I'm 32. I'm a charge nurse. I walk past that bench every night. Sometimes, I sit. I still drink coffee from a thermos. And every once in a while, I think I hear Arthur's chuckle in the hallway. He taught me more about being present than any textbook ever could. And to this day, I believe. Love doesn't always need to speak. Sometimes, it just sits quietly, on a bench outside room 204. When I was 12, I wrecked my bike. It was the first week of summer. My friends and I were riding back from the gas station with sour candy in our pockets, racing downhill like idiots. I hit a rock, the handlebars jerked, and the next thing I knew I was on the ground, palm scraped, knee bloodied, and my front tire bent in half like a sad taco. I limped home pushing it beside me, one hand sticky with watermelon Sour Patch dust and shame. That bike meant everything to me. It was freedom, adventure, the thing that made you feel like you had wings, until it didn't. My parents couldn't afford to fix it, and we lived in a small town with no bike shop. I figured that was it for the summer. Then my neighbor, Mr. Anders, knocked on our door the next morning. He was quiet, probably mid-60s, lived 2 houses down. I barely knew his name. My mom said he'd retired years ago from something engineering-ish. All I really knew was that he kept his lawn perfect and once gave out full-size candy bars at Halloween. He said, "Heard you took a spill. Mind if I take a look at the bike?" I was surprised, but nodded. He came back with a tool kit and one of those small stools that old guys use when they work on cars. He didn't say much, just turned the bike over, examined it carefully, and said, "This isn't too bad. I can fix it." 2 days later, my bike was back. Not just working, but better. He'd replaced the tire, cleaned the chain, and even adjusted the brakes. I was stunned. "How much do I owe you?" He smiled and said, "You owe me one story." Huh? A story. When you come back from riding, tell me something that happened. Doesn't have to be big. Just something real. So I did. I told him about racing my friend Ethan and almost hitting a mailbox. He laughed. The next day, he waved from his porch. "Got any more stories?" That became our routine. I'd ride. I'd come back. And I'd talk to the man who fixed bikes. Eventually, Mr. Anders put a wooden bench under the maple tree in his yard. He said it was, for the stories. I'd sit there after riding while he tinkered with other bikes. Turns out I wasn't the only kid he helped. One by one, kids started showing up, bikes squeaking, chains slipping, pedals wobbly. He fixed them all. And each one of us owed him a story. There were no lectures, no judgment. Just quiet listening, occasional laughter, and the smell of WD-40. He remembered every name. Every bike. Every story. The summer I turned 15, Mr. Anders wasn't on the porch. His bench sat empty for weeks. The grass grew a little longer. The garage stayed shut. We heard he'd gotten sick. Hospital stays. Weak heart. I still rode past every day, slowing at his house, hoping he'd be back. Then one Saturday morning, I saw the garage door open. He was sitting just inside, oxygen tube under his nose, holding a wrench. I dropped my bike and ran over. "You're back." He chuckled. Had to fix one more bike. I looked behind him and saw a small pink bike. Training wheels. Covered in flower stickers. "That one's for Ella," he said. "She's new on your street. She deserves a first story." Mr. Anders passed away that fall. His daughter came by weeks later. She said he'd written a note before he died. It read, "To the kids who brought me stories, thank you for making my retirement full of laughter and life. I leave behind the tools and the bench. Keep fixing, keep riding, and above all, keep telling stories." We built a little free library next to his tree. Filled it with bike manuals, comics, journals, and a notebook titled The Story Book. Every kid wrote something after a ride. To this day, that bench still sits under the maple tree. We still fix each other's bikes. And we still share stories, with the man who taught us that even small repairs can keep life rolling forward. I met Nora on a bus. Not in some dramatic, eyes locked, world stopped spinning, kind of way. More like, quietly. Repeatedly. It started during my second year at my new job. I had just moved to a different city, didn't know anyone, and took the same 6:10 a.m. bus to the train station each day. Rain or shine, tired or hungover, that bench became a weird kind of constant. And so did Nora. She sat 3 rows from the front, always in the same seat. Gray coat. Knitted scarf. Thermos. Reading a book, every single day. I noticed her before she noticed me. Mostly because she was the only person on the bus who didn't look like a zombie. She smiled at the driver. She said, "Thank you," when she got off. She laughed softly at her books. I watched her because, honestly, she looked like she belonged. And I didn't. One day, it was raining hard. The bus was almost empty, and the seat next to her was dry. She looked up and said, "Go ahead." It wasn't profound. But it was something. I nodded, sat down, and pulled out my phone. After a few minutes, she asked, "Do you always scroll that fast?" I blinked. "Sorry? You haven't actually read anything. You've just flailed at your screen for 5 minutes." I laughed. "Yeah. I guess I'm just trying to look busy." She smiled. "You don't have to. It's just a bus." From then on, we spoke almost daily. I learned her name was Nora. She was 28. Worked at a used bookstore a few blocks from the train station. She hated coffee but drank tea out of a coffee thermos because people expect it. We talked about books, awkward customers, our favorite smells, and what we'd do if we found a bag of money in the street. She'd donate it. I said I'd invest it in socks. We never exchanged numbers. Never met outside the bus. But for 27 minutes each morning, she became my favorite part of the day. One Tuesday, Nora wasn't there. No gray coat. No scarf. No quiet smile. I tried not to overthink it. People take sick days. Miss buses. But the next day she wasn't there either. Or the day after that. A full week passed. My chest felt heavier each morning. Then, the following Monday, she returned. But this time, her scarf was different. And her smile was smaller. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat beside her. "Missed you." She looked at me and whispered, "My dad passed. I had to go home." I didn't know what to say. I just sat with her in silence. When we got to the stop, she stood up and said, "Thanks for not talking." It was the kindest thing anyone said to me. On the last day of the year, she handed me something before she got off the bus. A folded piece of paper. Inside was a short note. "Thanks for sitting beside me. You reminded me people are good. I'm moving back home to help my mom. Today was my last bus ride. P.S. The bag of money? I'd keep it now. But I'd still buy you socks. Nora." I kept that note in my wallet for years. Last month, I walked into a tiny bookstore while visiting a friend in her town. There was a gray coat hanging by the door. I recognized her before she turned around. We locked eyes. She smiled. And then said, "Well. It took you long enough. I just moved into my first apartment, tiny, 5th floor, thin walls, no elevator. The kind of place where the kitchen and living room are the same, and you can hear your neighbors sneeze through the pipes. I didn't know anyone in the building. I worked late hours, kept to myself, didn't expect anything more than occasional nods in the hallway. But then came the knock. I opened the door to find a man in his 70s holding a Tupperware container and wearing a baseball cap that said, "Navy Veteran." "You're the new guy," he said. "I guess I am. I'm Frank. I live in 4B. Thought I'd welcome you properly. That's chicken and rice. Mild, didn't know if you were a spice guy." That was it. He handed me the food and left without waiting for a thank you. Frank knocked again the next week. This time with lasagna. Then beef stew. Then homemade chili. Careful, this one bites back. It became a quiet ritual. Every Wednesday evening, like clockwork. He'd bring food. Stay just long enough to ask, "You doing all right?" and leave before it got awkward. One day I asked why. He shrugged. Someone did it for me when I was your age. Best man I ever knew. Said the world runs on small kindnesses. So now I'm just keeping the engine going. Over time, we talked more. He told me he'd been widowed for 10 years. His daughter lived across the country, and they weren't close. His dog, Millie, had died last year. And his knees were about as trustworthy as a politician. Still, every Wednesday, he climbed those 5 flights of stairs with food. When I offered to come down and get it, he scoffed. What would be the point of legs if we didn't use them stubbornly? One Wednesday, I was a mess. Work had gone south. I'd made a mistake on a project that might have cost me a promotion. My girlfriend and I had broken up 2 days before. I hadn't eaten. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I opened the door before he knocked. He just looked at me. Rough week? I nodded. He handed me a bowl of soup. Sat down in my doorway. And for the first time, stayed. He told me stories from the Navy. About missing home. About losing friends. About how sometimes, life feels like you're patching holes on a sinking ship, and you do it anyway. You keep going, he said. Because someone else patched it for you once. One Wednesday, I showed up and found a note on his door. In hospital. Be back soon. Save me some stew. He didn't come back. He passed 2 weeks later. Peacefully, the nurse said. Quiet, just like he lived. At his funeral, there were maybe 10 people. Most of them neighbors. A few old Navy friends. One man stood up and said, Frank didn't talk much. But he made sure you were fed. I couldn't stop crying. A few months later, a new tenant moved into 4B. Young guy. Looked nervous. Had that same lost, overwhelmed look I'd had when I moved in. So I knocked on his door. Held out a container of chili. Said, careful. This one bites back.